Well, Lazarus, I'm delighted today to be welcoming back to the Lazarus Initiative, Jason Brett Serle. You'll remember the English writer, filmmaker, NLP master, and licensed hypnotherapist with multidisciplinary interests in ortology, authentic spirituality, psychology, law, and sovereignty. Emphasis on true health and healing. And emphasis again on disruptive technologies, organic permaculture, and conspiracy fact as opposed to fiction. His two books on spirituality, Kissing Achilles' Heel, The Joyful Unmasking of Delusion, and the other book, Abide as That, Ramana Maharshi and the Song of Ribu, have received praise from such luminaries as Ramesh Balsaka and Muji, the great master. He's also written books on cryptocurrency, the standard catalog of cryptocurrencies 2018 and 2019 editions, as well as a chapter in Ralph Metzner's book on the psychedelic mushroom, unpronounceable Tionanakatel, I'll get that from him in a minute, Sacred Mushroom of Visions. And his first documentary film, Mind Your Mind, A Primer for Psychological Independence, was an official selection at the London International Documentary Film Festival and is currently distributed by Journeyman Films in the UK and Film Media Group in the United States. He's the founder and the main driving force behind Maybug Productions and currently lives on the southern coast of Spain with his wife and two boys. I was honored to have been able to host Jason's documentary Archetypes, if you remember, the epigenetic engineering of humanity, on this platform a couple of months ago. And despite its heavy censorship, I wanted to give this important film the platform that it deserves and make sure that people get an opportunity to watch it. So for anyone who hasn't seen it yet, you can find it on the Symposium 17 bonus section or on Jason's Maybug Productions YouTube channel. So Jason, very, very happy to greet you back in the fold of the Lazarus Symposium.
Thank you, Sacha. Likewise. Lovely intro. Great to be here.
Well, today we're exploring an intriguing area in which you have a wealth of knowledge and experience. You've spent several years working in an occult environment in London, in this bookish sense. Yeah. And you were exposed to a vast sampling of some of the most important literature on this enigmatic subject matter. I also understand that you work closely with Aleister Crowley's illegitimate son, Amado, who gave you first access to some of Crowley's most notable works.
Yes, indeed. Yes, I discovered Crowley in my late teens, early 20s, and I came across first of all, his stuff is very difficult to get hold of, or at least it was back then.
Right.
So I came across the introduction to his book, Magic and Theory and Practice. And I think it still is for me one of the most amazing pieces of writing to be found anywhere. And it just had me hooked. And the fact that he was a very controversial character and a difficult character to get hold of his books, as I mentioned, was even more of a sort of a capture device for me. So I ended up moving to London for a while. And in London, I discovered the mecca of occult books and esoteric books, which was Watkins Books. It's been there. It's the oldest esoteric bookshop in the world, I believe.
Wow.
Visited by Crowley himself and characters like Alan Watts and all the big boys, Krishnamurti and all these people, you know. And I ended up working there as head of the magic and occult department, and met a number of interesting people and people in the OTO, and had got in touch with people like Kenneth Grant, who was one of Crowley's students, one of his English students, who then took on one branch of the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis. So this was the first time I walked in there. It was the first time I'd seen so many Crowley books in one place. It was a whole shelf of Crowley books, and I'd never come across anything like that. It was maybe one or two, if you were extremely lucky, in some dusty shelf in a bookshop. So that just sold me, and I ended up working there for 5 years or so, and amazing times, to be honest. Yeah.
So let's just look a little, if you don't mind, at Aleister Crowley. I mean, he's a fascinating character for sure, and without any doubt, I would say a seminal archetype in the last century. And to the religious adherent, he's an abomination. He's regarded as akin to the devil himself. And
Right.
number one, Aleister Crowley, in your view, good guy, bad guy?
Far more complex than that. So yeah, I mean, it's understandable if you look at him from the perspective of a Christian, or I think a fundamentalist Christian, he could appear to be an antichrist. But if you unpack a far more broader spectrum of religious traditions and tantra and paganism and, you know, the left hand and the right hand path and these sort of things, then you can begin to understand Crowley in a far wider, broader context and understand a bit more of his crazy wisdom, because ultimately that's where he was coming from, you know. So
In the same way that archetypal characters like Gurdjieff also kind of lurched into the scene and completely fucked up the soup and culled all the sacred cows and inverted all of the informed wisdom of the day in the esoteric sense, and to great effect. Actually, I was a huge fan of Gurdjieff's when I was in my teens into my 20s. It was I was a complete devotee of his form of inverted wisdom. And
he was the devil to some and a saint to others. He was a very
right
character and very
right. So these are Rasputin. You know, Rasputin in Russia, a similar archetype. Would you agree?
Yes, the trickster, the crazy wisdom master. It's some of the shock value is for the purpose of students learning certain things. Some of the shock value is due to their having transcended the lower level moral understanding of good and bad, right and wrong. So yeah, these are characters. I think we have a tendency as human beings to want to black and white things and, you know, pigeonhole something. We feel a bit safer with it. We know what it's about. And one of the things that Crowley one of the reasons he's kept my interest for all these years is that any attempt to define him, he will escape from that. There is some element of his personality that will throw you off track and, you know, completely undermine any attempt to say whether he was good, whether he was bad. What was he? He was far more complex than that, you know.
Yeah, I like that. And of course, it's difficult for most people. And a lot of people in my audience are also going to be more devoted to kind of scriptural morality than not. And to them, watching this, I know we're going to get a lot of letters. I'm going to get a lot of letters of sort of dissent about why would we even have this conversation? Why would we even be interring the remembrance of Aleister Crowley when in a sense, I don't know that. Put it this way: with Friedrich Nietzsche, there is a kind of legacy flaming that occurred, which one can is a testament to Nietzsche in a Nietzschean sense. With Gurdjieff, similarly, there was a kind of flaming of the legacy he left behind, which is a kind of cozy, slightly reckless, and very brilliant grandfather who came in to destroy much of the old apparatus of thought, identity, and revelation, and so on. But with Crowley, I don't sense the same legacy. That his legacy hasn't settled, put it that way. There's no flaming of a legacy of Crowley that makes you think, okay, well, yes, he came along, was a trickster, he culled a bunch of sacred, because there's some stuff that is so disturbing in a sense to the moral mind, traditional moral mind, that we don't even want to go there. Can you, was this conflated? Was he lied about by the establishment? Was he a threat to the establishment?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, you have to realize that this guy was born in 1875. He was born in the Victorian period, a very puritanical, prudish era. I mean, most of what he did, if it were transplanted to 21st century and the guy was a rock star, you wouldn't bat an eyelid. You know, when it comes to his sexual tendencies, when it comes to his experimentation with drugs, this is really not anything of shock value these days. But of course, back then it was. He was also someone who was on a quest for truth, on a hardcore quest for truth. And that took him to China. He walked across China. He made his own translation of the Tao Te Ching. He studied with tantric masters in India. He went to study Buddhism in Sri Lanka. I mean, it was all up for grabs. And he was one of the sort of foremost Westerners who, in the early 20th century, was back in the UK lecturing on yoga and these sort of things. So along with sort of Blavatsky and Theosophy.
I was going to say, that's, you know, that's the segue into Blavatsky, yeah.
But Blavatsky has been maligned in the same way because he would speak about Lucifer and these sort of archetypal characters, and they're very complicated to get into. One of the problems with Crowley is he's very dense and he's so well read, and his interests and expertise are so broad that there's very few people who understand him. So this is another thing, you know, what you don't understand, you often denigrate. You can't quite grasp what they're on about, where they're coming from. He would talk about Kabbalah. He would talk about alchemy. He'd talk about the Hermetic tradition, ritual magic, yoga. You know, it was all part of his system.
So that was the bit that becomes the impediment to my mind of when you get into blood rites and blood magic and that kind of arena of occultic focus. Was he involved in blood ritualism and sacrificial?
In his early experiments, I think the biggest extreme he went to was sacrificing a pigeon and a toad at some point. So once again, you have to understand this man is experimenting with things. One thing I'd like to, you know, put forward about this when it comes to, you know, these ideas about satanic sacrifice, he made a lot of enemies in his lifetime. And they accused him of a lot of things, and never did they accuse him of anything approaching, you know, a human sacrifice or any of these sort of extremes. That to him was way beneath where he was headed. So I think you have to understand that there are elements of darkness that are, you know, any psychological path involves facing the shadow. So the magical path includes the psychodrama of the shadow, which is facing Choronzon and Beelzebub and invoking them and subjugating them to your will. And these sort of things that really, if understood in psychological terms, are nothing more than psychodramas to process trauma, to process your animalistic tendencies and to subjugate them to your higher will, so to speak.
Very good.
So, you know, he never got lost in any of that. It was all just passing experimentation in his early times. And he had a very denigrating view of black magic and black magicians. He had a higher and nobler pride, and he was on the path of the great work, the path of the Magus, and that doesn't involve any of that.
Indeed. And
he brought a lot of it on himself because he would, you know, the British newspapers had a field day with him. So they dubbed him the wickedest man in the world and these sort of things to make, you know.
Well, if the British establishment says it must be true.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, to anyone who knows anything, that speaks volumes right there, you know. And he played up to it. He liked the attention. He was, amongst many things, an egotist who would play the roles. And it's like, you take me for this? Okay, I'm going to be this for you. More than you imagine, you know?
Gotcha. So some of those photo calls or photo sessions with him wearing some pointed hoods and looking very kind of ominous, that he was probably just pandering to that nonsense.
Pandering to people's, yes, expectation, gathering.
Very good.
Yeah.
So this is really important when you start to speak about the showman, the more entrepreneurial and kind of Aristide Bruant kind of character, just hamming it up and playing it up.
Well, the other part, of course, was his sense of humor, which in his writing, he had a very British sense of humor in many ways, and that would have some darkness and sarcasm and all these elements which are very difficult to unpack when it's words on a page for people. Yes. So there's often an often quoted part of Magic and Theory and Practice when he talks about having sacrificed however many 100 young male children in a year, right? And people hold this up like, oh my God, it was a joke. Anyone who knows Crowley knows this reference. It was a reference to masturbation. The idea being that each time you masturbate, you're sacrificing a potential child.
Very good. Very good.
It's kind of strange.
No, these are huge distinctions to make, and very, very important ones, because it's about time that we started to reflect on these seminal archetypes as part of our legacy. And it's important that we clarify the lens retrospectively. So I'm really very grateful for this conversation, because Crowley is one of those characters I just parked and thought, well, I'm not going to go there. I studied a great deal about Blavatsky, because I wanted to understand the genesis of Krishnamurti and understanding, the world teacher and all of that stuff that was coming down the pike. So, but I see absolutely where you're coming from. Talk about, if you don't mind, with Aleister Crowley, we've given a kind of basic overview of the character, the caricature, and it's not, it's a bit of this, it's a bit of that, it's a bit of everything. Foundationally, we're dealing with a man who was blatantly honest. Absolutely, blatantly honest, and we have also an insight into his life that we just don't have with any other character, because part of the magical tradition is to keep a magical diary. And so he had these extremely detailed diaries of each phase of his life, and they would detail, his sexual activity, his, each personal detail. And so there was absolutely nothing hidden. And after his death, all of these were published, of course. And so we really don't have that sort of insight into any other personality. All the skeletons that were in the closet of someone are no longer in the closet. They're out on display. Yeah. I just wonder what we'd make of certain historical figures if we had that same level of resolution as to their private lives, and what went on. So he emerges now, in light of this conversation, as being an exemplar of veracity, probity, and to that extent, integrity. I would absolutely say so, yes. And I find it hard often when I come into contact with this sort of idea of him being a Satanist and all these crazy things. And I just think, Crowley, what have you read? What have you read? Because I've read a whole lot of Crowley, his own words. Yeah. Not some of the biographies that were to generate book sales and stuff after he died. Right. His own words and his own magical diaries even. And I just don't find it anywhere. I find a man with a commitment to truth and to the great work of enlightenment and advancement of the human species. His whole creation of the magical path, the new religion of Thelema,
his whole role as the prophet of the new eon, the eon of Horus, and his understanding of there having been two previous eons, the eon of Isis, the Great Mother, you know, and then the historical period of Osiris, which was more patriarchal, the beginning of Christianity and all these sort of religions, and these are eons that last 2,000 years. So he came to declare the word of the new eon. And this is the work of the Magus. If you understand sort of occult societies and their grading systems, there comes a point where you pass the abyss. This is the ultimate test. You must be completely stripped of your ego to survive passing the abyss. You know? And on the other side of the abyss, you're reborn as the Magus, and part of the job of the Magus is to declare his word.
Yes.
So this is, you know, in the same tradition as what Jesus and Mohammed and Buddha and all these sort of mages did. They came out and they declared their path officially and formally for whoever was, you know, up for walking it with them, you know.
And none of them invited idolatry. In fact, they all warned against it, curiously enough.
Absolutely.
So did Crowley intersect with the establishment, with the kind of Masonic orders and secret societies of the establishment?
Well, he was a high-grade Mason in various traditions. Yes. So obviously a lot of the flack that he receives comes from that direction. And it's another area that I think is just far more complicated than we try to paint it, you know. For the most part, Masons, I mean, lower level Masons don't really know what's going on in the higher levels. It's like a men's club. My dad was a Mason. I mean, it was a gentleman's club, you know?
Sure.
And the higher levels, I think it's another one of these organizations that any organization that gets to a certain amount of power, then the dark interests, the cabal, they need to get inside it and take it in their own direction. So I don't know to what point it has been, you know, we know that it has been for sure. I know that Crowley inhabited a different idea of the Masonic tradition, and it's a graded system that originally is based upon sort of Rosicrucianism and these sort of things, where you are developing yourself through different grades. So if you look at any of the other orders that he was involved in, whether it was the one that he began, which is the AA, the Order of the Silver Star, whether it was the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis, which he became the head of because Theodore Roos, who was the head of the German order, contacted him because he thought he'd divulged some of their highest secrets in his writings. But all of these occult orders were based on a grade system. The idea of the grade system is simply because knowledge comes in stages. We don't tell the newborn baby to walk. We teach it to crawl, and once it's crawled, then it walks, and then it runs, and then it, you know, all knowledge. And we see this in other traditions as well. If you look at Tantra, they had twilight language. They had a codified way of writing their highest texts, so that the profane would not misuse it.
Yes.
And so the whole idea of the occult grading system is to protect the knowledge and to protect the knowledge from being misused, which I think is a noble idea.
Okay, well, let's get back to his pathology. First defining moment, as you understand it, of Aleister Crowley's life.
I would say, so he was born into a wealthy family. It must be said that they were part of the Exclusive Brethren, which was a part of the Plymouth Brethren, which was a fundamentalist Christian group.
Right.
So his father was wealthy. He was the owner of Crowley Ales. He had retired by Crowley's birth, so he was free. And most of the time he would travel around preaching these sort of fire and brimstone fundamentalist sermons, you know, that he'd give. And that definitely had a great impact on the young Crowley. He talked about his father as his hero and friend. He had difficult relationship with his mother, on the other hand. But I'd say his first defining moment was the death of his father when he was 11. His father died of throat cancer, which is, as I understand it, you know, there's kind of a lot of suffering towards the end. So I think that was a big turning point for the young Crowley, to see that level of suffering. And if you put it in the context of his father being a God-fearing, pious man, and yet being taken away through this suffering at this young age.
What kind of a God? Yes, all of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's an interesting psychological trauma that he had as a young age. And of course, that sent him in another direction, because he didn't have that firm paternal figure that was strictly guiding him. So he started to go off the rails, started to become, you know, hard to handle. And he was passed through the sort of English private school system until he ended up at Trinity College in Cambridge University. And this was all his beginning of experimentation. He was cut loose from his only book until the age of 12 or so, being the Bible.
Yeah.
To suddenly discovering literature and
the great work, essentially.
Yeah.
So the second defining moment was
the second
work.
The second defining moment when he was given this book by Karl von Eckartshausen called The Cloud Upon the Sanctuary.
Right.
And this book spoke about the Great White Brotherhood, and it spoke about these hidden adepts of, you know, enlightened adepts that were behind the scenes guiding humanity, very much like the secret chiefs of Blavatsky.
Yeah.
And then shortly afterwards, he came into contact with the Golden Dawn, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which was his first occult order that he became initiated into.
Right. Okay. And the third defining moment?
The third defining moment, I'd say, came in 1904. So he shot through the grades of the Golden Dawn. He was a very apt at learning and studying, and he was very keen at it. And he started living with Alan Bennett, who was already quite accomplished magician in the Golden Dawn, and They were working together and studying together. And then in 1904, he went to Egypt on his honeymoon with Rose Kelly, and Rose, who'd never been interested, showed no interest in any of these things, started saying to him, "They're waiting for you, and they want to contact you," and these sort of ambiguous things, you know. And so he put it to the test and tried to get some more details, and she conformed to these tests, and it sort of piqued his interest a bit more. And it ended up with him sitting down. We're actually in the midst of it, because yesterday was 20th of March 1904 was the day that Rose first said, "They're waiting for you," and then these series of tests, and then April the 8th, 9th and 10th, I think it was, he sat down, and for an hour each day, this voice dictated over his left shoulder 3 chapters, which became Liber Alvel Legis, better known as the Book of the Law.
Yes.
So that was his third defining point, which he didn't realize its importance at that point, and he sort of put it away for some years. And it wasn't till later that he rediscovered it and started reading it and seeing the depth of, you know, the knowledge and symbolism in it. And it really became the sort of the backbone, the fundamental spiritual text for the birthing of Thelema, which was his system, you know.
Yes. Very good. Magic in Theory and Practice.
Yeah, Magic. So Magic in Theory and Practice was his, after passing through the ordeal of the abyss and coming out through that the other side, his declaration as the Magus was magic and theory and practice, in which he explicitly put forth his vision and his path forward for humanity.
What age is he now?
This was 1917.
So he was around about the 40 mark.
Yes. He was into his 40s by this point.
Very good, very good.
So he'd established his own order, the AA.
AA, right.
He was publishing massive amounts of literature through the AA, and otherwise he put out this the Equinox, which he'd publish on the yearly equinoxes, which was the sort of official organ for his occult order. Right. And then at that time, he was approached by Theodore Roos of the OTO, the German branch of the OTO, and they ended up making him the head of the British OTO as well.
Well, because that was far more established.
It was by that time, yes. Yeah.
Right. Okay, and in simple terms, describe the metric of the OTO.
Well, once again, it was an occult order based on a grading system from sort of neophyte to magus, magister templi, and all these different grades that require the study of different texts. And one of the things that always drew me in was the breadth of knowledge that they covered. There was no sort of there was nothing off the table, so to speak. Anything that could be used to further one's progress was used. So the different grades would study yoga and Buddhism and Kabbalah and alchemical symbolism and so yes, and then the higher grades got into certain sexual magical practices, and this is once again what some of the stuff that's got him a bit of a bad name, but we know now through the Kama Sutra and Tantra that's now infiltrated the West that this has been part of spiritual practice for thousands of years.
Right.
As far back as we can, as the religious impulse goes,
Indeed.
So there's a lot of baggage, I think, from his times to these times, because people are too lazy, or they don't have the time or the inclination to find out for themselves, because it's too difficult to get into it all. There's a wealth of information, and it's hard to navigate, and it's not written for the layman. So a lot of Crowley fans have discovered him through his interpreters, like Israel Regardie, who was been his secretary for some time, because they managed to make it a little bit more accessible to people,
more palatable. Right. Yeah. Exactly. So let's just describe the left hand path and start with Madame Blavatsky's definition.
Yes, well, she was the one that brought the left-hand path, the idea of the left-hand path, the right-hand path, into Western terminology. And it was her translation of a tantric idea, Varmacharya, which means left-hand attainment. Really, she made it into left-hand path. But the basic idea is that the right-hand path is everything we conventionally know to be spirituality, so it's the path of the monk, it's celibacy, it's the rejection of alcohol and drugs and these sort of things, whereas the left-hand path is the recognition that ultimately, if this reality is non-dual, then everything is infused with God's glory.
Right.
And there's a trap in being too celibate. There's spiritual pride that can arise from a lot of the right hand techniques. So the left hand path was the tantric path, the path of paganism. There's always been these two currents, and one attempts to ascend and transcend and and sees the world as somehow polluted or unclean or illusory. So you have that in certain branches of Hinduism, where the world is Maya. You see this in the Gnostics, where they see the world as a creation of the demiurge. You see this in Christian mysticism, where, you know, this is Satan's realm to some extent, and we need to elevate ourselves to heaven. So
and in Catholicism, of course, everything's predicated on guilt and fear.
Yeah, well, that's what the church has taken upon itself for, obviously, the manipulation of the masses. But then, so the left-hand path is, you know, paganism, where nature is holy and we celebrate the seasons and the passing of the lunar cycles and so on, and tantra, and all these ways are seeing that everything can be used as grist for the spiritual mill.
Very good, very good.
So that's where it came from. Crowley's idea of the left-hand path, he applied this to people who had failed to cross the abyss. So basically, you must be free of all traces of ego to successfully pass the abyss. If you don't, then you come out the other side, and the idea, the spiritual transcendent idea of I am one with God, there's so many greats have, you know, I and my Father are one, and this sort of declaration is no longer applied to the transcendental principle that you now identify with. It's applied to your ego, right? So his idea of the left-hand path was in a sort of, in a failed sense, people who had gone to a dark place by not conforming to the correct steps, you know.
Yes.
What seems to me to be the best understanding is the left-hand path and the right-hand paths, by virtue of them being paths and us calling them paths, they're both valid means to the same goal, enlightenment, you know, whatever you want to call it, realization. And this is why I think Satanism or any of these sort of things are just aberrations, you know.
Okay, good. Just going to that a little bit more.
Things that Crowley has been accused of himself, you know.
Right.
Well, once again, Satanism, it's not a black and white thing. I have come across, you know, people like Anton LaVey. I don't believe he really indulged in anything too dark. I think it was it's almost a cult of the individual. And
I think that he was also a showman as well. I mean, LaVey, in the Crowley tradition.
Yes. But it's the cult of the individual. It's the realization that you as a human being on your own can do whatever you want to do, you know, and you have that power. And it feeds on sort of archetypes of Lucifer and sort of the idea of Prometheus, who stole the fire from the gods and gave it to man so that we could do the same thing.
Individuation is also a rejection of collectivism, of government, of the Catholic Church, of the parent corporation, of the cult programming of the status quo, of culture, civilizational models, all of which are kind of orchestrations. And in a sense, the LaVey, in that sense, and the Crowley characters are rejecting that homogeneity as being what it is,
Absolutely.
the ultimate idolatry.
One of the most famous phrases from Crowley's Book of the Law is every man and woman is a star. And that is to say that everyone has an absolute unique trajectory. Unique. There's no two trajectories of stars that are the same. And so that's absolutely right what you're saying. And it's a very, it's about, there's a Taoist element to it. It's the sense of you must discover your true will. Your true will is falling back into the absolute flow of the universe, where there's no egoic tendencies, no little voices wanting this or wanting that. You're literally allowing yourself to be exactly who you are supposed to be. And so a lot of what's called Satanism is really just that. And it's often taken up by people who like to shock and who like to, but true Satanism is the religious impulse of psychopaths. That's what I think it is.
So why is Crowley accused of being a Satanist?
Well, one of the big things that people talk about is his identification with the figure of the beast 666.
Yes.
Right. So this comes from a couple of different things. This comes from his mother calling him the beast. She would always call him a beast if he acted up and was naughty and this sort of thing. And so he sort of reveled in this because of his difficulties relating to his mother. He sort of reveled in this idea of him being the beast. Later in life, when he sort of developed this idea of the procession of the aeons and the aeon of Isis, Osiris, and Horus, which he was the prophet of, he understood that in simple terms, that the beast 666 is the one who would come and overturn Christianity.
Yes.
Now, he didn't understand that to be any type of satanic, just as Christianity had come and done away with the aeon of Isis, the Great Mother, right? Yeah. And initiated this new aeon, this new vision for the future. That's what he was doing. He was overcoming the old, worn-out vision, as he saw it, of Christianity, and he was putting forth the new word. And as such, he was the one who would overcome Christianity and be the new Magus to put the new word forth. So, that was a big part of it, that obviously people of a Christian tendency, they can't see beyond that. The fact that someone would want to identify with that, they can't get past it.
Yeah, I mean, you're describing the dogmatic traditionalist of Christian, who by definition, in my view, is the idolater. They are in reverence to false light, and they're devoted to the degree of perversity, shuffling along on their knees in Lourdes or doing their pilgrimages and banging their fucking heads on the ground and all the rest of it. That for me is abject idolatry. It's false light worship. It's the opposite of everything that they are masquerading as being and doing in life. But that describes the crux of mainstream morality as well, alas, alack, which is so fucked up and inverted that it delivers unto us the British Parliament. It delivers unto us the BB paedophilic sea. It delivers unto us the College of Cardinals shuffling around in their little blood red booties. It delivers unto us Washington District of Columbia and the most godless goddamn puppet show the world has ever witnessed. That's what that mainframe of religious zealotry and idolatry delivers unto us, the kingdom of the devil. And Absolutely. What we're saying here is that the Blavatskys, I can't speak to LaVey, but the Blavatskys of this world, the Gurdjieffs of this world, the Crowleys of this world, the Nietzsches of this world are trying to create a completely different delivery mechanism here of pure truth.
Absolutely. I think the true Satanists are at the highest levels of the Vatican. They're behind all those organizations that you just mentioned. And I think the true Satanists are psychopaths. That's why their only religious impulse, they cannot transcend their egos because they have no grasp of there being anything beyond the ego. So therefore they reify the ego as the God.
Right.
That's the satanic impulse. That's why it's not a path, because it cannot lead to any type of enlightenment. And these are people doing the real sacrifices. These are the people we need to be worried about. It doesn't matter how you dress up, what language you dress up, your activities in. Satanism is Satanism, and Crowley doesn't come close to any of that nonsense. Like you say, he's I would put him in the same context as Gurdjieff, great man, Blavatsky, great woman. these innovators, these mavericks, these people who stepped way outside the box of their times, in order to grasp the truth and try and bring it back for other people to see.
Very good, very good. These are the true shock poets and the true rock and roll stars, the true counter revolutionaries. Yes. So I think this has been a very, very valuable conversation, and I know it's going to help a lot of people understand the imperative here of us not being afraid of looking at these certain characters like Crowley, and dare I say it, to begin to actually read up even, and perhaps find your next dial-up of evolution.
Yes, absolutely. I really hope so, because it's such a shame that a great man like him is so lost on so many people because they're not even prepared to take that, first step into getting beyond the propaganda and what you've heard about him, and actually read something that he's written, because you will find sublimity, you will find a grasp of discernment that is very, very rare, and an ability to communicate it that's, you have to work on it. It's not easy to get into his stuff, because it's so broad knowledge and he goes from one thing to the next. But he's definitely, I think, someone who has defined the modern era in good ways, and he needs to be respected and upheld for that.
Very good. Well, I think we've done a great service to the Flame of Pure Truth, and takes us to the top of the hour of this segment. Thank you, Jason, for joining us on Lazarus today. So very grateful to you, brother.
My pleasure, Sacha. Nice to see you.
God bless you. Bye-bye now.